I'm going to hand you over to our chairman, to our North West MEP, to the man really we've all come to support and you've all come to hear. I'll give you the chairman, Nick Griffin.
Thank you. Generally, as the old hands will know, the table that I'm at Trafalgar Club events is named after the good ship, the Victory. This year, not. Who's on the Victory table? There's a Victory table here. Okay, there you go. So that's because this year the top table was named the Redoutable, a French ship, obviously in honour of our very honoured guest and a very good friend of mine, Bruno Gollnisch, a tremendous man who made me very welcome. When you're there as a new boy in this huge parliament, it's a little bit scary, but Bruno made me very, very welcome and brought me along, and he's a really, really good man. So, given that, yes, thank you. Given that I was aware of the sheer cheek or chutzpah, as certain people would say, of inviting an officer of the French Naval Reserve to sit at the table, I thought, no, we'll do something. So we changed it to Redoutable, which was the bravest ship probably that day in 1805, October the 22nd. It was the ship that Nelson's Victory pulled alongside of with these devastating broadsides, in which, it has to be said, the British were generally better than their French or their Spanish opponents. They practised and practised and practised. And the captain of Redoutable, a man called Jean-Jacques Lucas, was nevertheless unafraid of this. In fact, they battered the Victory for an hour or more as it approached. But once it got side by side, they're battering hell out of each other, these two ships. But Lucas had trained his men in particular. He knew that they weren't as good in the artillery, but he trained his men in musketry. And once the battle was joined between the gunners, there was also a battle going on the top decks, with both sides sweeping each other with musketry. And Lucas, who survived the battle, after the battle he wrote, I was reading this yesterday, he wrote in his very long report, detailed report, he wrote about how once the two ships were side by side, he said, then a heavy exchange of musketry opened, in which Admiral Nelson fought at the head of his men. That's a different picture to what we have. Actually, if Nelson stood there with his medals and so on, and one or two French snipers, it was actually a full-on musketry battle in which Nelson fought. Quite remarkable. And Lucas recounts, and it's absolutely a fact, that by the end of this musketry battle, the French won. Not merely by mortally wounding Nelson, but they effectively cleared the decks, the upper deck of the Victory. Every last man of the British force on the Victory was dead or dying on the deck. The gunners below were still beating hell out of the French ship, but the French won the battle on top. And in fact, Lucas and his men were about to board the Victory, to take the Victory, quite possibly, and certainly to get onto the gunners down below, when unfortunately for them, the Téméraire, which despite its rather French-sounding name was another British ship, came on the other side and swept the Redoutable's decks with grape shot, killing virtually every man, wounding Lucas very severely, and stopping the boarding. And at that stage, you got this French ship now fighting incredibly bravely between two huge English-British vessels. And in the end, well, after this grape shot, the total in the end of the French ship, out of a crew of 634 men, 300 were dead and 222 were seriously injured, unable to carry on fighting. Only one man in six was still fighting. And Lucas still initially refused to surrender. By this stage, all the ship's masts, the three ships' masts have come down on each other, so the ships are absolutely tangled together. They really can't get away. And at this stage, Lucas, because there's virtually no one left to stand, struck his colours and surrendered. And then he did something quite remarkable. He said to the English captains on either side that we need pumps. We need pumps and we need men to save this ship. I've got my wounded on this ship, and if you don't help us, it's going to sink. And if you don't help me, I'm going to set fire to it. And the Temeraire on one side and the Victory on the other are so entangled with their fallen masts that if the Redoutable goes up in flames, so do they. So for that reason, and also because these were seamen who knew exactly the kind of men desperately wounded on that ship, and despite the fact they were an enemy, they provided men and they provided pumps, and they temporarily saved the ship. And that night there was a terrible storm, which sank most of the damaged French ships, and Spanish ships as well. Redoutable survived that storm and sank the following night. And despite the mayhem, despite the fact that this ship and this ship's gunnery had killed the most loved man in the British Navy, Admiral Nelson, when the ship sank, the survivors, who included Lucas, were welcomed on the Victory, and he was welcomed not as a prisoner, not as a man who'd murdered Nelson, but as a brother officer, and he was dined in the officers' mess. And he ended up as a prisoner. Most of the Frenchmen were released on parole when they reached Cadiz and Gibraltar. They were released. Lucas was a prisoner for some time. When Napoleon came back in 1815, he was loyal to Napoleon. He fought again. He died some years afterwards. But the fact he was welcomed on board the ship, where just hours before his men, his musketry, had killed Nelson, tells you something about a spirit which is gone really from the whole of the West. We've lost so much. One thing we have lost overwhelmingly is the concept of chivalry. The concept of chivalry was a Western invention. It was something quite unique about the way to do war. That yes, war is an evil, and if we have to do war, then it should be done in a chivalrous fashion. And you do everything you can to beat your opponent. But when you've beaten your opponent, you treat them decently, and you treat their women decently, and you treat their cities decently. Unless they don't surrender, then you're entitled to flatten them. But if things are done by the rule of war, there is a rule of war. We are the people, among the many things we've given to the world. The Europeans gave the world the concept of a rule of war. Then in the midst of this monstrosity, this hell, this thing that shouldn't be, if it has to be, there are ways to do it to minimise the effects, particularly on civilians, particularly on the innocent and on prisoners. And you see in the horrors that you see on television, when out of Syria, where despite the fact they're trying to boost the rebels up as some wonderful, moderate, liberal army or whatever, you see the savagery of the Wahhabi, the Islamist way of doing war, when the thing to do, the thing to enjoy, is slicing your prisoners' throats and watching the others, forcing the others to watch it as you do it. And it's so un-European. It's why we're particularly revolted by it. So that's why we named this table after Redoutable, to make that point and to hammer home the fact that what nationalism in Europe is most about of all is when we've won the struggle to save our nations, to reverse the foreign invasion which otherwise de-Europeanises us all, then beyond that we have one other great aim: no more brothers' wars. Not French, not British, not Germans, none, never again. And it's not just rhetoric. We're working on this so that very early next month, over the weekend of the 10th and the 11th, myself, I hope Bruno and various other people, we're going to be in Poland, where there's the annual United Nations huge festival of Western masochism, where they seek to further deindustrialise our countries and screw our taxpayers with the United Nations Climate Change Conference. This monstrous attack on ordinary people, particularly in the West, which is a combination of just a desire to tax us to death with a shocking ethno-masochism from our own rulers, where they actually want to destroy our own nations, and an extraordinarily sinister leftist, multinational, one world government operation whereby they're using the threat of this fictitious climate change as an excuse to impose one world government on us. To impose a world government, you need a world problem. So they've invented the problem. And I've been to two of these climate change conferences in Copenhagen and in Qatar last year. And I've watched with amazement as you've got groups of silly students outside, all with their placards showing the drowning polar bears. Because they're not drowning at all. They live on icebergs. It's what they do. They've done it for thousands and thousands of years. They'll carry on doing it for thousands and thousands of years. Because if the ice didn't break up, they couldn't get the seals. And they live on seals. So when the polar bear is standing on the iceberg and in the middle of the water, it's not because he's actually desperately oppressed. It's because he's doing what polar bears do. But the silly students stand with these pictures of the drowning polar bears, and the politicians, all they say, oh, the young people, they're demanding we take action. Look at them, they're protesting out there. They're demanding we do more. What they don't tell each other, but they all know, is the fact that students are only there because various European Union bodies and others have paid them to go there. So the politicians pay them to demand the changes that the politicians want. And then they say, look, they're demonstrating. And never, ever have ordinary people, real people, demonstrated outside these events, saying, look, your climate change policies, your taxes, they're destroying our jobs. They're freezing our old people to death. We demand that you think about this, and we're going to be there. The nationalists are going to be there in Warsaw in a couple of weeks' time, nationalists from all over Europe, with one common demand that the masters stand up and listen and consider our people freezing to death, our kids without jobs, and that they take notice of what we, the people, believe. And that's nationalism in unity, in action, and we're going to be there. And I hope also that the fact that European nationalists are working together like that will indicate to people that nationalism is not about war. It's internationalism leads to war and conflict. Nationalism between nationalists who recognise, because we love our own countries, that we recognise that other people love theirs as well. It can be really a force for peace, and we'll do away with these wars between us. But when we do away with the wars, we will not be doing away with the courage. You can't afford the courage that was shown between the French Navy and the British Navy and the Spanish Navy, the courage shown in war after war after war between our European brothers, that courage we need to keep. We need it, we have it in this, our party as well, you know. Not that long ago, when in fact just after Lee Rigby was so savagely hacked to death in Woolwich, I was speaking to one of our East London organisers. He said, do you know, just a few weeks ago, one of those men, one of those, I have to say, alleged killers, because the trial's still coming up, and they're pleading not guilty. God knows how that works. Red-handed, with blood streaming off his hands. He, just a few weeks before that, had approached one of our local stalls, out campaigning, and he got talking to them. He'd asked them what the BNP thought about Afghanistan and Iraq and all the rest of it. And our chaps, of course, and lady as well down there, said quite openly, well, we shouldn't be there. We're proud of our armed forces, but we shouldn't be in those countries. So at this fella said, oh, that's okay then. And off he walked. But if they'd said, well, actually, yeah, we think we should be there, presumably. But equally, okay, so in that case, well, I suppose by fluke, they told him what he wanted to hear. But you know yourselves, whenever you're out there campaigning like that, you don't know what one of these creatures or a gang of them will want to do or will come up and do. But nevertheless, week after week after week, I know a lot of the faces, and our other comrades, the people who aren't here, the people basically, the hundreds and hundreds of activists who can't afford to be here tonight, who instead of giving money and effort, just give effort, and very valued it is, they're running that risk every time they go out. They don't exactly know what's going to happen. It takes a great deal of courage. And that need for courage is not going to diminish over the years ahead. It's getting worse, I'll tell you that. At 12:30 on Wednesday night, in the middle of the night, Jack and I were woken up by a car in the yard and the bell and a banging on the door. And there's two policemen outside. That's okay. Two coming to arrest me. They don't normally leave it. So you're early chaps. Go away. Come back at 5 before dawn. That's when you normally arrest people. And I'm not the only one in this room who's had that. But no, they weren't there to arrest me. They were there to ask me to phone the local special branch because I turned my phone off. And so I phoned them, and they read me what they call an Osman warning, which is the warning that the police give anyone when they have specific real intelligence of a real threat to your life. And they read me this Osman warning. And I said, well, okay, so you've read, they said, oh, something's appeared on the internet and there's a definite threat. So I said, okay, can you tell me whether it's Islamist extremists or Irish Republican dissidents or Marxist anarchists? I forgot to say, or Nazi crackpots, because it could be any of them. as a matter of fact, which group want me particularly now? And he said, oh, it's the Islamists. So, okay. Anyway, it turns out, because I've now seen the video, that it's the Al-Shabaab group, the people who carried out that appalling massacre in Kenya, and they put a video out. You might have seen it on television last night, perhaps on the news. They were talking about how various moderate Muslims have been threatened by this group, and Tommy Robinson has been threatened by this group, and they showed a picture of good old Tommy going into a mosque with one of his new Muslim best friends, taking off his shoes to show his Union Jack socks. I was nearly sick, really. After all that, all those lads, all those people, he's led up the garden path. Dozens, scores, hundreds, mainly of young men, but young women as well. He's led up the garden path in demonstrations and had them arrested. I was sat in Adam as well a few weeks ago with a lass, about 28, 29, I think? No great age. Less than 30. She went on an English Defence League demonstration and she left her 3 children with a mum. And she got arrested and she got out the next day and she didn't have 3 kids anymore. They'd been taken into care. They'd been snatched by the state. And she'd gone and done that for Tommy Robinson, thinking he's a hero standing up for Britain. And then he takes his shoes off and walks into a mosque with his Union Jack bloody socks, having sold out. Absolutely disgusting. Absolutely disgraceful. Because he'd lost his bottle. We don't lose our bottle. That's why we're different, because we're nationalists. We're not toe rags. We're not bought and paid for. But there we are. He was on it. Nothing about me being on it, no. Because, as several people have remarked today, we've been decreed by the media they must now make us absolutely invisible. So they didn't talk about what I did in Syria. They're not going to talk about this. We can do the most remarkable things. We do the most remarkable things. And yet now they've decided there has to be absolute silence. They've decreed we do not exist. At present, we'll break through that. Something will happen, and all of a sudden they'll be hysterical. And they'll think, oh, we've kept quiet about them. We haven't told the British people they exist for 3 years, but they're still here. Now we'll have to smear them. The wheel will turn and there'll be waves and waves of smears. But at present, it's absolute secrecy. So the fact that Al-Shabaab want to murder me, and for that matter, they also showed other members of the party just on activities. So it's open season, as far as they're concerned, on members of the British National Party. But for the BBC, Sky, the Daily Mail, all the rest of them, not one word is going to appear. It's really quite ironic, actually, because there's only 2 politicians in Britain with any status and recognition who are genuinely, or at least appear to be genuinely, anti-Zionist. Of course, Al-Shabaab say they're deeply anti-Zionist. One is George Galloway, for whom I have no time whatsoever, but I think it's probably, at least he appears to be, as I say, he appears to criticise what happens in Israel and say the Palestinians have rights too. There's only him and me. There's only one politician who's been against every single intervention by the West with British forces and American forces in the Muslim world, and that's me. And yet I'm still on these crackpots hit list. Is it Al-Shabaab or Al-Mossad? I don't actually know who runs that operation, but in any case, myself and Jackie and our kids, and by extension all of you, you're all on the list. You know what? 3 of my grandparents were air raid precaution wardens in London during the Blitz. It's a damn sight more dangerous than worrying about Al-Shabaab. I'm not going to give up. So, I'm hoping that as the thousands of people who in the last few years, young people especially, have come to look at the English Defence League instead of the British National Party as the way ahead, as the people who are standing up, I think they're now going to see, no, that was wrong. And that we were here before Tommy Robinson, we're still here now, and we're going to be the ones carrying on and going ahead. And I've met some of those people, and some of them are pretty rough and ready, but there's also amongst them an awful lot of really good people, really committed people, men and women who work really hard to earn money, to keep their families together and so on. They're running their businesses and so on. They're not morons, these people. You know, that's this typical bourgeois, toffee-nosed, upper-class, liberal-type attitude from people like the BBC and The Guardian and all the rest of it. They're really decent people, lots of them. And I've met time and time again, I thought, that's why we haven't got an organiser in that town, because they've been in the EDL, because that's what woke them up to start with. 5 years ago, we woke them up, and recently it's been them waking them up. But now they're homeless, and I'm hoping very, very much that those people will come to us, and I believe that some of them will. And we've got to get into their heads that actually it's not a bit of a game, because to some of them it's been a bit of a game, really. You can turn up just once in a while to a protest on a Saturday. You can come along, you can take huge amounts of booze. If you want to, you can snort huge amounts of coke on the coach there, and I'm afraid they do, because that's football culture and so on, that's what they do. And then you can go home again, you've had a good time. You know it's not like that. Our effort is absolutely relentless. And I believe, I'm sure, that some of those people will now realise, Tommy and Co. is a bit of a joke, a bit of a laugh. Now we've got to get serious. And it's not turning up once in a while on a Saturday. It's organising school patrols, which are there to protect young girls from grooming, night after night after night. It's organising food banks in a local ward, week after week after week. Nationalism is a long-term struggle. It's not about something where you turn up just for a bit of entertainment and feel you've done your bit. We are here for the long haul, and some of those people are going to know it. And instead of lager and coke, we offer them, the good ones from that organisation, sacrifice and hope. And our people need hope. They need hope. It's not just the fear from Al-Shabaab or the unorganised immigrant thugs who terrorise so much of our inner cities. It's far more than that. You could get rid of all of them and there'd still be so much that our people need. You've got the bedroom tax. I've heard from constituents of mine, good people who've worked hard all their lives, who, because they're now grandparents, so their kids are left home, but now they're being penalised 14, 28 quid a week because they want to keep a spare bedroom for their grandchildren. And they're being driven to despair by that. You've got husband and wife who split up and they've got a couple of kids. And the kids spend half the week in one place, half the week in the other. So both parents need the extra room or two. But because they're spare rooms now, because the kids aren't there all the time, they're getting fined £14 every single week for each room when they've got not enough income coming in. And they're sinking under a wave of debt. And people are suicidal over this. Our people, good people, are suicidal because the government is trying to screw £500 million out of the poor people of Britain through the bedroom tax per year. And they say we've got to have the money. Do you know they were going to spend half of that and more in 12 hours blitzing Syria? 6 months worth of pain inflicted on tens of thousands of ordinary decent families they were going to blow in a huge firework display, murdering poor kids on Syrian anti-aircraft batteries. That's what they were going to do. Absolutely wicked, these people. You've got, apparently, a survey I saw the other day, 1/3 of the people in Britain, 1/3 of working people in Britain, at the end of the month, have £10 disposable income left. 1/3 of the people of this country, the working people, have just £10 left at the end of the month once they paid for all the essential bills. That's a knife edge. Just a fraction more over, and week by week by week they're going into debt like a lot of the rest. Because it doesn't mean that 1/3 are in that state, the rest are all okay. Oh no, because half of the rest haven't even got £10 disposable income left at the end of the month. Every single month they're more and more in debt. There's hundreds of thousands of people now in this country rely on food banks just to live, just to feed their kids. Not because they're idle or feckless or useless, because there aren't any decent jobs anymore. Because as Bruno was saying earlier on, the jobs have all been shipped abroad, or the wages here have been dragged down by wave after wave after wave of immigration, which is about cheap labour for the bosses. And that's the state they've drawn our people down to. So people do need hope, and we're here to give them hope. And worse is to come. We've got the crisis in the Eurozone, rolling on, getting worse and worse. We saw the incredible spectacle of the US debt debacle over the last few days. Just settled now. No, it's not settled. It's just put back till March. It's a rolling crisis. They said it's a great triumph that the Americans have now decided they've given their government permission to borrow more than $17 trillion. They can go into debt to $20 trillion, and that's a great result. Utterly unsustainable lunacy. And when that goes down, it's going to affect everybody. We've scarcely seen anything yet in terms of poverty. There's a lot more coming. When you add on to that the chaos of immigration, the chaos of these no-win wars they've taken around the world, there is so many problems that it's been described very aptly that our world faces a convergence of catastrophes, different catastrophes all coming together at the same time, all feeding into each other. And that's what's coming, just around the corner. And I tell you this is not our problem. These aren't our catastrophes. They'll affect our people, but these are not catastrophes for us as nationalist people involved in the political struggle. These are opportunities. And we face a time of enormous opportunity. It's why all over Europe there's been so much effort put into trying to destroy nationalist parties, because the people who are doing it know perfectly well that the stability of their entire system hangs by a thread. And it's not going to be cut, it's just fraying and fraying and fraying, and one moment it will snap. And then one crisis will feed another crisis. What will happen in the immigrant areas of Britain when in 2 years' time the lights go off because they've got rid of so many power stations? You don't want to walk down those areas with the lights on, let alone with the lights off. When there's no money coming through on those dole checks, all hell is going to break loose all over Europe, and it's all going to be on television, and it'll all feed into each other in a cataclysm, this convergence of catastrophes, which, as I say, is not our problem. There's one other vital factor over the last few years. You see it more and more. You can feel it month by month, actually. On top of all this, there's a torrent of truth pouring through the public psyche all over the Western world, because the internet, the enemies of freedom, the enemies of our people, are desperately trying to seize control of the internet, but they haven't succeeded. It's a free-for-all out there. Every idea on the planet is out there for everyone to pick up just by 1 or 2 clicks. And a lot of it's truth, and a lot of it's half-truth, and some of it's crazed conspiracy theory fantasy. In a way, politically, it doesn't matter. If people believe it, it makes it real enough for them to change their opinions. It turns them against our government. It wakes them up to what the system really is. It doesn't really matter if it's true or not. I remember in the 1970s talking to people about the Bilderberg Group. And people didn't believe the Bilderberg Group existed. Now, if you have the internet, you put that in, you'll find who's in it, where they were in which years, and you see all these bankers and top politicians there getting their orders. So the minute you hear it, bang, you go, and you can find for yourself it's true. When I was involved, when we were young, things like that, you could spend a year trying to convince someone it existed. Now they'll simply go and check and they'll find it. There's this torrent of truth out there whereby people won't believe what they used to believe anymore. And things like, it's not just the Bilderbergs, Rothschilds, Warburgs, Rockefellers, you put any of those things in, someone hears it, they put it in, and their eyes will be open, because it won't be me telling them or you telling them. They'll simply find it for themselves on the internet. This wave after wave of truth, and it's what makes the future, as the problems really start to hit, so uncontrollable for the masters. They really are in trouble. There's this new mood. Now, these things still aren't respectable to talk about. And there's some people in nationalism who want to make nationalism respectable. And I would say it's not possible to make nationalism respectable, because it's asking you to respect, or to beg for the respect, from the people who've done their level best to destroy not just our nations but our people, and they're still trying to do it. And there's no possibility of us respecting them or them respecting us. They want to wipe us out, and we want to put them in prison, strip them of their ill-gotten gains, and cast them into darkness. Yes, I know, yeah. And we are at a point in history, an amazing point in history, which perhaps all sorts of different people with slightly psychic or strange abilities have foretold. And in the Christian tradition, it's the end times. In the Viking and Nordic tradition, it's Ragnarok. It's the end, not the end of the world, but the end of this phase. The Indian Hindus had it as well. All sorts of different traditions have got this moment at which all the old world collapses and something new can be born out of it. And that is where we are now. The Vikings referred it to as an axe age. They referred to it as a wolf age. And I tell you, that's what we're entering. A time of great hardship, a time of great pain. But if you're not happy with what's being done to our society, a time of great opportunity, because if everyone out there was happy, we wouldn't stand a hope in hell. It's when people understand that this is wrong, that something has to be changed. It can't go on as it is. When will they do something? When people are saying things like that, then you know that there is the opportunity to change things, and in our case, change things for the better. So, particularly for the people watching this, I say, yeah, we scrub up well, don't we? We scrub up well. Us bunch of political whatever we are, political wolves. Yeah, but don't be fooled. Because just because we scrub up well doesn't mean we are respectable. We want the most unrespectable thing possible. We want to pull down, to destroy a whole ruling elite which is trying to destroy our people. We want a revolution to save our people, to save the peoples of Europe. It's deeply unrespectable. We are not a respectable people. We are political wolves, viewed from the point of view of the people who've been running the show. That's why they hate us, because we are going to tear apart all the evil that they've done. We're going to change it utterly. That's what we are here to do. And finally, the wolf alone isn't much of a creature. It's the pack. It's standing together that makes you powerful. And too many of our brothers and our sisters have been scattered the last few years, sitting it out, demoralised by defeat, by the fact we didn't win as easily as they thought that we might win, that they think their efforts came to nothing. Too many of them have sat it out. You haven't got the right to sit it out anymore. No one has the right because they've quarrelled with someone in a branch or the party leadership or whatever in the past. No one has the right to sit it out and say, no, I'm not going to come, because it's not a game. It's a serious life and death struggle for the survival of our people. And everybody who's ever been part of it has to get involved now, because another 10 years will be too late. We've got this window of opportunity opening for us as this chaos hits the ruling elite. There's a few short years in which we can change things, but only if everybody is with us. And I'd like to close by reminding you, I know that quite a few of you are very cultured people, but if you haven't heard of him before, Rudyard Kipling, go and find his works on the internet and look about what Kipling said about the wolf when he talked in terms of, we be of one blood, ye and I. We nationalists, whether we're just British, whether we're British and French, whether we're British, French, Dutch, German, Italian, Greek, we are all brothers. We must all stand together and remember Kipling's crucial words of advice to the young wolf. The strength of the pack is the wolf, and the strength of the wolf is the pack. Brothers and sisters, we've got hunting to do.